As we wait for the release of Yone and his appearance in the Spirit Blossom event, we have more time to get into the other stories. Specifically, for the first time in a while, we are moving away from Ionia, and we are going to have a look at the latest story from Bilgewater. Although technically Yasuo and Ahri are on their way to Bilgewater right now, so we are not actually moving too far away from Ionia. Anyway, usually, I tell people that I am going to shorten the stories, because these stories are quite long, and I still end up with 20 to 30 minutes long videos. So today I will try something different. I will really try to shorten it, to bring it down to the classic 10 to 20 minutes length. So without further ado, here is the newest story about Misfortune and Nautilus, called Dead in the Water. Before the story begins, there is a verse from the Song of the Slaughter. Red tide out, red tide in. Hook 'em up, carve 'em true. Strip 'em down, guts to skin. But always pay the lady her due, or the titan of the deep will come for you. Of course, this song is talking about the fact that if you don't throw a coin into the sea before you sail out, by which you honor the gods, Nautilus, who was transformed into the titanic monstrosity because his captain didn't pay the tithes, would come for you. The story begins in the smelliest place currently known to us, the Blood Harbor, which had the smell of, and I quote, weeks-old gutted leviathans, the shit of 10,000 scavenging seabirds, and the piss of the Slaughterdogs workers. Here, Sarah Fortune, together with Raven, who has been her right hand for quite some time now, took a small boat to ride out to the Moon Serpent, which was a big old ship that was floating on the horizon, surrounded by a dark mist. Sarah had to get there because that's where Captain's meeting was happening. However, to appear wealthy, for this occasion she wore a highly impractical but quite stunning outfit. And because it was impractical for combat, she took Raven with her just to be safe. Raven still thought that it was reckless to go there. He felt like the sea had an evil cast to it that night, but Sarah told him that he just worried too much. She then revealed that the reason why the captain's meeting was happening on that ship was because Captain Ally had died, and his crew was quite big. And so not only is that ship where his burial was going to happen, a captain's requiem they called it, but all the living captains went there to perhaps get Ally's former crew to join them. As Raven rowed their boat closer and closer to the Moon Serpent, not only could Sarah see all the pricey decorations on the ship, but they also got a proper view of how massive the ship was. Which made Sarah wonder, how did Ally even pay for all of this? But that's when she realized that it was probably because he often skipped on paying the tithe. He usually offered nothing but a copper coin or a drop of rum for the lords and ladies of the deep. To Raven, this was yet another reason to turn around and go home. When they finally got close enough to tie their tiny boat to the ship, Raven pointed out how the ship floated quite high above the sea line, for how big it was. This probably meant that all the ship's holds were empty, and most of the crew was gone. Before they climbed on board, Raven quickly asked Sarah if she was sure about this. She told him not really, but when given the chance of going forward or back, a strong woman once told her that it's always better to go forward, so let's go. Of course, the strong woman Sarah mentioned was Ilawi, who met her during the story Shadow and Fortune. As they got on board, understandably, the first thing the ship's crew did to Sarah was take away her guns, together with Raven's daggers. They put these weapons in a chest, and Sarah quickly marked which one it was. It had a cannonball dent in its right side. When they walked onto the main deck, they noticed an enormous bronze cannon. Its muzzle was sealed with wax, and the body of Captain Ally wrapped in sails was lying next to it. Because as a part of the captain's burial, his body would be entombed inside the cannon, pickled in rum, vinegar and camphor, and then it would be thrown to the bottom of the sea. But as Sarah and Raven praised the beauty that would be lost in the waters, by which they meant the expensive cannon, not the captain's body, they noticed a serpent caller standing nearby, which was suspicious, because it was rare to see a serpent caller at a captain's requiem. They couldn't really read the person's face, because their mouth was covered in corals, and their face had a dried squid on it, with crudely cut out eye holes, through which the serpent caller surveyed all the gathering captains. After this, there was a scene where Sarah and Raven talked about all kinds of different ships, and they mentioned how the ship they were now standing on was built. Raven said that he likes them broad in the beam, and Sarah jokingly answered, So she had heard. Raven ignored this joke, and he said that this ship was probably not as nimble as a cutter, but during storms it had to be very still. This speculation was confirmed when a woman known as Captain Blackstone dropped into their conversation. She told them that the Moon Serpent had sank the ship called Darkwill's Glory, and it even poked a few holes in the Red Noxtora. Of course, the name Darkwill's Glory is a reference to Borem Darkwill, the previous leader of Noxus. And the Noxtora are the Blackstone gates Noxians built on roads to mark the way leading to the capital city. Anyway, Raven was surprised to see Captain Blackstone because she was rumored to be dead. And that's because she had spent the last year sailing around the Emerantine coasts, hunting for gold. But after the locals revealed that they had mages that could turn the sea and the skies as a weapon against her, she returned to Bilgewater. Then Sarah made her a quick offer to join their crew, which Blackstone considered before she returned back to the other captains. But then, Sarah froze when among all the captains, she recognized a handsome face. An enemy face. Raven recognized him too, and he reminded Miss Fortune that all the captains were under the Truce of the Sinking Soul, which was a tradition that forbade bloodshed during another captain's burial. But that didn't stop Sarah, and so she marched right towards this man. She punched him in the guts, kicked up her knee to crush his skull, and she tried to pull out her guns, but she remembered they were locked away in a chest with a cannonball dent in its side. So instead, Miss Fortune grabbed him by his collar. As this man pleaded for mercy, he lifted his arm to show that his hand was replaced with Piltover machinery. Because of course, this was Peter Harker, the man who together with Captain Crow and Bragg tried to betray her in the comic Fortune Smiles, where at the end, Crow and Bragg died, but she let Petier go after shooting off his hand, promising that the next time she would see him, she would take something more from him. Thankfully for Peter, another person appeared to break up the fight. It was Captain Thorn. To Sarah, this was a surprise, because she knew Thorn. He was always just a grimy sailor, but he became a captain after Sarah killed Crow and Bragg. And just like them, he was Sarah's enemy too. After this, Sarah went back to Peter and picked him up with the words, "Can I give you a hand?" This was a joke Peter didn't appreciate, but he accepted Sarah's help nonetheless. As the two talked, Sarah learned that Peter's new hand was crafted in Bilgewater, but it was made by a Zoanite apprentice called Gisbert, which is a name you may remember from the story called Progress Day, where Gisbert was showing off his inventions to join the Medarda clan in Piltover. However, he was declined, which might be the reason why he ended up in Bilgewater. Anyway, then the two talked about why Sarah didn't kill Peter the first time. She admitted that she had let him live because killing him would have been Gangplank's way of doing things, and she was trying to be better than him. Then, after they all took a swig from Ally's really bad rum to celebrate the truce, they talked about how Ally died, and they realized none of them really knew. Some said he was stabbed in his sleep, others said that he was strangled by a squid that wasn't dead during his dinner, and some said he was simply drunk and he fell overboard. Instinctively, as they all looked down at the sea, they saw that the water was swirling around the ship, as if something big was coming up from below. On top of that, they noticed that the fog was slowly rolling in. Thorn then said that it doesn't matter how he died. What mattered was what would happen with his ship and his crew. That's when all four captains looked at each other, because they all knew that's exactly why they were all here. According to old traditions, the person who held the dead captain's sigil would become the next owner. But not only did nobody know where Ally left his sigil, these days nobody cared about this tradition, and everyone would rather start more bloodshed. Then, suddenly, Sarah felt a slight shift in the deck, as the entire ship dipped up and down slightly. Without hesitation, Sarah pulled out a silver coin and tossed it into the sea. Thorn asked why did she do that, and she told him someone had to, because as the ship's sails unfurled, it was a sign that they started their voyage to bury Captain Ally. The ship sailed east, and within moments, the mist had fully enveloped them. On this trip, the four captains finished the bottle of Ally's awful rum, which helped Sarah loosen her mood, and so she sent Raven below the deck to find another one. More theories about how Ally had died emerged, and Sarah wiped her tears of laughter after she heard a theory where the trickster made him chase a golden narwhal only to be killed by the Blood Harbor Ripper, after he had mistaken the identities on his list. At this point, all of them were quite drunk. The rum was bad, but it was strong. And when someone shouted something from above, the 4 captains wondered if they shouted "land ho" or "sand low," which Peter joked was a traditional Shuriman greeting. Sarah herself couldn't control the laughter. But finally, when they heard the sound of chain, followed by the anchor hitting the water, it was clear they arrived at their destination. Strangely though, looking at the rock in front of them, Sarah recognized they were in the Moonshard Reef, a place where one could rarely find the Marai, which was Nami's tribe, although they are supposed to be on the other side of the world, next to Targon. Anyway, she had no idea why they would stop here. There was a theory that Ally was part Marai from his mother's side, but before they could figure out the truth, the Serpent Caller had begun the burial ceremony. Sarah looked around, and just like her, she saw that everyone who gathered around the wax-sealed cannon were swaying around from all the rum. And yet, she didn't see Raven anywhere. The ceremony continued as they secured the cannon with Ally to a hook, and the Serpent Caller began to speak. They talked about how the future is as twisted as the many limbs of Nagake Boros. In many of these futures, they had seen that the peaks of the Serpent Isles were ablaze, as their people were dying and the enemy was closing in. But they also saw a future where their people were proud and strong, united under a great leader. The Serpent Callers were weird, but even Sarah had to admit that she had never heard them saying anything like that. Then the Serpent Caller praised Captain Ally, how he was greater than any of them, and that he was a man of vision who knew what had to be done. As they lifted the cannon with Ally's body into the air, with the cannon pointing at the crowd and slightly tilted down, the Serpent Caller continued that all of them who were present here have failed Nagake Boros. They all fought and betrayed one another. None of them had the vision to make Bilgewater the ruler of waves. They all made tiny offerings to the bearded lady for personal wealth or blessings. But in order for Bilgewater to prosper, they needed Red Tide of offerings. Sarah looked around to check what the other captains thought about this insane speech, but they were all too drunk to even pay attention. Then she looked at Peter, who gave her a short smile as he was backing away towards the edge of the ship. And suddenly, Sarah started sprinting behind the cannon as she realized what was happening. The Serpent Caller ripped the squid from their face to reveal that the man who brought them all here was Ally himself. He had the crazy eyes of someone who had never paid a single tithe his entire life, hence why he was rich. And so, as his crewmates held the cannon above the ship, consumed by madness, Ally lit the fuse, and a moment later, the world around them exploded in a deafening blast of fire and thunder. The next time Sarah opened her eyes, she was surprised that not only was she still alive, but also that the ship was still floating. Such cannon was supposed to rip the ship into pieces. Still, the explosion caused carnage Sarah hadn't seen in a very long time. Then, when she noticed how much her arm was bleeding, she realized why the ship was still floating. The cannon was loaded with a canister shot, which was designed to cut flesh apart, while keeping the ship intact. In fact, those who were closest to the cannon were almost unrecognizable. But not everyone was dead. Sarah saw Blackstone lying in a pool of blood. She wasn't sure if she was dead, but she was very still. Like the snake he was, Thorn slithered out from beneath her, but Raven was still nowhere to be found. Next she looked at Peter, who was leaning against the rails, bloodied but mostly unhurt. He grinned, and hate filled Sarah because she was sure Peter had known about this trap. Then Ally's crew emerged from below the deck, and they started finishing the job with gutting knives. It took her a moment, but eventually Sarah got back to her feet. She then sprinted towards Ally again, but his two twin deckhands intercepted her. After a fight, she was able to pierce the skull of the first one with a dagger, because even though they had taken away her guns, she was still able to keep her two daggers, which she masked as pins in her hair. But since the other deckhand was wielding a spiked club, Sarah decided to retreat and looked for her guns locked in a dented chest. Thankfully, after the other deckhand shattered one of the chests to pieces in frenzy, Sarah found her two pistols in all the rubble, and she quickly disposed of the other deckhand too. When it came to Ally, who couldn't believe that Sarah killed his two twin deckhands, in reply, she shot each of his kneecaps with the words, That's for all the captains you killed tonight. But before she was able to put the final shot in his head, to really make this his funeral, she felt the entire ship sway a bit again. And suddenly, everything, even the wounded, fell silent. Sarah pressed her pistol against Ally's throat as she demanded to know what was happening. But Ally told her that this was none of his doing. Then he laughed with the hysteria of a madman as he continued that his bill to the sea was due and they were going to pay it with him. In shock, first Sarah looked down at the sea, where the water was still swirling around the ship. But then, when she looked into the distance, about 200 yards out, she saw the Titan rising from the deep. Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing, because she was living through a dark legend, something that nobody thought was actually real. But here it was. Nautilus was real. When Nautilus hurled his anchor at the moon serpent, it smashed into its deck, and the ship started sinking under its weight. Then, when Nautilus yanked the anchor back, the ship started breaking apart. Moments later, geysers of black water and some oily substance erupted from below. At that point, when Nautilus started hitting the ship with his own hands, Ally just screamed that he's not real, that it is just a story. But Sarah shouted back that he looks pretty damn real to her. Then she felt a fiery heat when the gaze of Nautilus fell upon her. It filled her skin, as if the Titan could see into her very soul. Sarah didn't really know what to do, and so she grabbed onto the ropes and she started climbing up. However, driven by madness, Ally climbed after her, shouting that if the sea wants him, she would go down with him. It didn't take long, and after a couple more hits from Nautilus, the ship finally split into two halves. Then Nautilus reached down with his massive gauntlet, and with his crushing grip, he grabbed Ally and pulled. However, still being driven by madness, even after he lost his clothes, he was hugging Sarah, who couldn't shake him loose. But finally, she got rid of him after she stabbed him with one of her concealed daggers. But before Ally let go of her, she was able to snatch a pendant from his neck. It was his sigil, the one that, according to the traditions, would make Sarah the owner of his crew. After that, Nautilus, with Ally in his grip, turned and returned below the sea. Still hanging on the ropes, keeping herself upright, Sarah had a chance to look around to see everything that just happened. She saw that the other half of the ship was already under the water, with only a few sailors still floating above. One of them was Peter Harker. When he saw Sarah, Peter tried to strike a funny conversation with her in all of this chaos, but Sarah didn't let him, as she threw a noose around his neck that was connected to a burial cannon, and she let the cannon sink below. A few seconds later, Peter's body followed. Finally, Sarah felt some joy when she heard Raven joking about losing such beauty, by which he meant the cannon, not Peter. Then she found Raven rowing towards her in their tiny boat. Of course, she demanded to know where was he this entire time, and Raven told her that when he went below the deck to get the rum, he found the ship crew getting ready to murder people. When he got noticed, he jumped off of the ship, and then he got into their tiny boat, and now he was here. As the two rowed away, Sarah noticed that Raven also picked up Blackston, who somehow also managed to survive. But then Raven demanded to know what happened above. Sarah told him he would never believe her, but it was Ally's doing. Also, she showed Raven the sigil which she managed to get from him, which to Raven meant that at least this trip wasn't a total waste of time. Then, before they finally disappeared into the mist, Sarah noticed Thorn climbing up onto the Moonshard Reef. Because somehow, the bloody rats always make it out. And that's it for this Bilgewaterian story. I know exactly what you might be thinking about. Because we know that the game about the Ruined King is going to start in Bilgewater, based on the teaser screenshots. I believe that all the different names we have heard here might be a setup for that game. Riot is supposed to have another anniversary in 2 months, and considering how much of a success the last anniversary was, I wouldn't be surprised if Riot had more announcements. And since it has been a year since we have heard about the Ruined King, or at least the game, maybe we will get more info about it, especially the release date. So yes, this story might be a setup for that game. And just in case it happens, mark my words, if the Harrowing arrives, and there is an undead spirit tied to a cannon with a mechanical arm, remember, I called it. It would be a really cool appearance in that game. However, we still need to figure out how does Ari and Yasuo fit into this.